Welcome to the channel. I appreciate everyone tuning in live. Thanks for being here. We're going to break down the ACC power rankings. Clemson did not have a game. They were on open date, so we will not review last week's Clemson game. We'll start, as we always do, with football and with the ACC power rankings. So I'm going to pull those up. Give me just a second here. All right. And as I like to do, we start at the bottom. I won't spend too much time on some of these bottom feeders. Florida State lost again, as they've done in every game except for their win over Cal, which almost feels fluky now. But they lost to Miami. Their defense actually gave a little bit of a fight for a while, but eventually they were overwhelmed by a more talented, better coached Miami team that looks like they could really have something going this year. Not a whole lot else to say except Florida State, they might only win one more. They've got Charleston Southern, so they might finish 2-10, which is just a wild turnaround from going 12-2. Just kind of unheard of to have such a huge drop off. Virginia, Tony Elliott, his crew was moving up the power rankings. I had them really low at the start of the year. I think I had them 15 or 16 at the very beginning of the year. They had moved their way up, but they've kind of plummeted back down, getting absolutely obliterated, blown out by the UNC Tar Heels, having really just no answer for them on offense or defense is pretty surprising. And they look like they'll lose out now. So they've got Pitt on the road. That's probably a loss. That's November 9th. So I guess they have a bye week first, and then they go to Notre Dame. They have SMU and Virginia Tech in Lane Stadium, where they don't typically win. You got to think the most likely scenario is they lose out, 4 wins. And after a pretty good start, they felt good after that comeback win at Wake Forest. But that feels more of a toss-up game that happened to go their way. Above them, you have Stanford and Wake Forest. They played this past weekend. Very close game. Wake Forest might not be great, but they played some fun games. This was the second time third time I've watched them, at least in the second half. And another exciting finish. Wake earned a 27-24 win over Stanford. And they actually had to do it without Damon Claiborne, their star running back, and they were still able to close it out. Stanford, for what it's worth, I'm at a loss here of how they were able to keep it so close with Clemson when they came to Death Valley. Now seeing how bad they are, Clemson probably should have dominated that one more thoroughly. But nevertheless, Clemson won that one, so no harm, no foul. But these 4 teams are sort of a tier on their own, and that's why I've grouped them together. I think these are the teams that are just not very good in the ACC. If you haven't already, jump in the comments, leave me your thoughts as we get going in this. Always fun to do that. This next group, another kind of big chunk of teams here, but I think they're sort of another sub tier in this right half of the screen here, where I don't know that any of these teams are good, but I do feel like this upper half is a good bit better than the last 4. North Carolina had a surprisingly dominant win over Virginia, which I mentioned. That was at Virginia too. Jacoby Criswell, their quarterback, threw for 293 yards, 2 touchdowns, no picks. And the remaining games, which maybe seemed tougher at the beginning of the year, or definitely seemed tougher at the beginning of the year, Florida State would have seemed really tough. Now it's kind of looking like a North Carolina win. Wake Forest, probably a North Carolina win. Maybe I wouldn't have said that a couple weeks ago. Boston College is faded. I don't know that that's a UNC win for sure by any means. Obviously, I've got Boston College above them, but very winnable. And then NC State, which, again, not at all a UNC win by any means, but very winnable. So North Carolina could finish strong, because sort of the reverse of what they normally do under Mac Brown. And then Boston College, they were up to a 20-0 lead, turnover-rated lead. They benefited from some mistakes Louisville made, but 20-0 lead, and they blew it to Louisville. Louisville's really a tier above, and Louisville earned that win in Boston. Now Boston College has to finish with Syracuse, SMU, UNC, and Pitt. So you got to figure maybe 2-2 if they're lucky. So BC, hot start. Then you kind of find out, that Florida State team's not that good. Some of their other wins, maybe not that good. The Michigan State win, only so-so. The close loss to Missouri doesn't look as good now. So there's a lot of that with Boston College. Cal, they destroyed Oregon State. I don't know that Oregon State's any good, but nonetheless, they finally could play someone not in the ACC, and they took care of business. They'll go to Wake Forest next week. I think that's their chance to win, or I think they have a good chance to win, which would be their first ever conference game, conference win as an ACC member. So that'll be big for them. And then NC State, they had off this week after beating Cal last week, so they remain above Cal. So there's your bottom half of the conference. And then here's where things get interesting. These three teams have all kind of beat up on each other. Georgia Tech beat Duke. Syracuse beat Georgia Tech. I think these teams are pretty good. Georgia Tech's interesting because they've kind of got injuries just mounting. They went to Blacksburg to play Virginia Tech. That's a game that you would normally probably lean on picking Virginia Tech now that they're playing decent football. But on top of that, Georgia Tech was without Haynes King, who's a great quarterback, and they were also without their linebacker Kyle Efford, really good linebacker. Those are two pretty big losses. They also lost their star running back, probably best playmaker, Jamal Haynes. Midway through the game, he ended up coming back. I don't know if he was 100%. So they only managed to loss in Lane Stadium. I still think Georgia Tech is plucky, but they're kind of this middle, kind of muddy middle here of this trio. Syracuse did beat Georgia Tech earlier in the year. They, you could argue any of these three in any order. And then, folks, if you're watching live, join in the comments and tell me how you'd order Duke, Syracuse, and Georgia Tech. I think they're really, really close. But Syracuse really got embarrassed. 3 pick sixes in the first half by Kyle McCord. Pittsburgh, this is a Thursday night game. Pittsburgh's defense just completely dominated. They ended up with 5 picks, 6 turnovers for Syracuse. Just an awful offensive performance for Syracuse and a dominant defensive performance by Pitt. Didn't really see a whole lot from the Pitt offense, to be honest, but it didn't matter. It was a 41-13 win. And we'll talk about Pitt later, but I thought Syracuse had a real chance to go to Pitt, earn a win. Was not the case, not even close to the case. And maybe that's a little bit more commentary on Syracuse, but at a certain point, you got to start giving Pitt credit. And I finally hit that point. And then Duke, they were at home. They had a really fun finish against SMU, had them on the ropes. SMU had 6 turnovers in that game. Just outrageous. I don't know if I said that about Syracuse. So it was SMU had 6 turnovers, which was just insane. And yet SMU was still in it there at the end. SMU gets the ball. They start driving for the game-winning drive with under 2 minutes to go, and they lose the fumble in their own territory. And Duke's got a chance to go down and win the game. They play it very conservatively, run the ball twice, don't even try a third down play. Just let the clock run down to 3 seconds to kick the game-winning 30-yard field goal. And a player on SMU literally jumps over the offensive lineman and then jumps up and blocks the shot like a basketball center. Blocks the field goal like a basketball center. Sends it to overtime. They each exchange touchdowns almost immediately. Duke goes for 2 and doesn't get it and loses. So SMU remains undefeated. Above them, you have Louisville and Virginia Tech. I think these are pretty good teams. I was really, really high on Virginia Tech at the start of the year. They maybe look silly, but now they've figured things out. This is the team I really expected them to be. Their offense isn't as dynamic, the passing game especially, as I expected, but they can run the ball with Bayshell Tootin. They're going to be dangerous, and Clemson's going to go there with a really tough game at Lane Stadium. It just feels like that's going to be a really tough night game. Louisville, they're a weird team because, on the one hand, they're the most normal team there is. They've lost to all 3 teams they faced. They're currently ranked. They beat all the kind of weaker teams they faced. But they go and they nearly lose to Boston College. They rally. They're 15th nationally in total offense. But in these big spots, a lot of turnovers against BC didn't kill them. They had 3 turnovers against Notre Dame, cost them that game. They had a terrible fumble, scoop and score they gave up to Miami, cost them that game. SMU beat them more straight up, but they had turnovers in that one too. I think they're dangerous. If they play Clemson this weekend, and we'll talk about this, but if they can avoid turnovers, they could be very dangerous. But I don't know that they can do that. So then we get in this top half, and here we finally have movement. I have finally moved Pittsburgh above SMU. Like I said, dominant win against a decent Syracuse squad. Didn't see that coming. Thought it would be another one of these kind of close games like they've been having. Pretty much all their decent wins have been close ones. Even like UNC was close. Just they haven't been dominant. And here they were totally dominant. Meanwhile, SMU just about loses, maybe should have lost to Duke. So finally, Pittsburgh, who is undefeated, jumps them. Miami also undefeated. They took care of Florida State 36-14. They only led 17-7 at halftime. Cam Ward only threw 208, threw for 208 yards, didn't have any passing touchdowns. For him, not great. Wasn't quite the blowout we expected. Florida State kept it within what ended up being a 22-point game. But nonetheless, Miami never really in trouble against our rival. And then Clemson had the week off. I didn't think anything Miami or I don't know that Pittsburgh could have done anything against Syracuse jumped that high. Miami didn't look, overly dominant. I don't know that they could have done anything against the worst team in the ACC to jump Clemson this week. The Clemson-Miami-Pittsburgh thing, SMU too. More chance for movement next week. But that is your ACC power rankings there. Jump in the comment section. Let me know what you think. And of course, as always, go Tigers.